Let's jump into yet another Transformer Slag podcast Patreon listener question. And once again, if you want to get on with this Patreon, just be sure to check the description below and see all the cool perks you will get. And I'm actually going to be increasing some of the extra stuff that you get with the listener question perks and above. I recently came into a whole bunch of cool free trading cards and stuff, so I figured I'd be throwing some stuff out for free to some patrons that have been part of the podcast. And so if you've been a patron in the past or a new one now, be sure to check your email, because you're going to be contacted probably for some shipping addresses to get some free stuff in the mail soon. So I'm slowly going to be rolling that out over the next couple of weeks. But that being said, let's talk about our Patreon listener question this week. And it comes from MassiveGains, longtime Patreon member. Thanks again, MassiveGains, for being part of our Patreon. So he asks, since you've mentioned how right now we are in a good buyer's market for Transformers, what are some good small Transformer lines to collect that ain't too expensive? Hope to see you on the next YouTube Live again. MassiveGains. Thanks a lot, MassiveGains. Number one, just to cover the YouTube Live thing, we're probably going to be doing another one this Saturday, 100%. But I also have a little extra surprise for people. On May 4th, which I believe is Thursday, 2 days from now, I'm going to be on the Franklin Armstrong Collective, which is like an urban hip-hop geek culture podcast. And I've known the guy who's run it for years. And so he's going to be streaming that live also. I believe it's going to be 7 p.m. Eastern time. Don't hold me on that one. But essentially, if you're following me on Twitter, if you're following the Transformer Slag Facebook group, that link will pop when it goes on live, and you can check me out on that too. And we're going to be talking a lot of Transformers on that one, because Doc Holliday, the guy who runs this radio show, he's also quite a Transformer collector. So it will be an interesting one to tune into. So also May 7th, check out for that one on top of, so Thursday and the Saturday coming up for your double dose of Proto Man. So let's get to that listener question. So small Transformer toy lines to collect. Well, there's only a few really, in my opinion, that are small but also relatively affordable, because I don't want to jump into stuff like, let's say, Robot Masters, which could get pretty crazy in terms of expenses, and even some of those Creos could get a little nutty in the secondary market. So I'm just going to kind of maybe in chronological order go through some lines, and I'll give my little takes on them. So one that's a really good one to collect that's relatively small is Machine Wars. I've always loved Machine Wars. It's always been one of those micro continuities with some interesting, what if fiction, if you will, if anything, of where it places in the world. And we've had different official interpretations of it, but nothing that's ever really been set in stone. And it's just, I always felt it's a really good line. I love the Optimus. I love the Starscream from it, the Soundwave. I love that it introduced Megaplex to us. The only weakness I find in that entire toy line is that it was a KB Toys exclusive, so sometimes they can be difficult to find. They're not as plentiful as pretty much everything else that I'm going to be listing off here on this list that got massive retail, but they're also kind of not really in demand. So even though there's not many of them out there, they're still relatively affordable, and there's still quite a few of them out there. They're not disappearing off the market. The grand entire line it's pretty much like 8 regular scale, or I guess we'll call them scout classes, and then you got 2 they were called megas but Voyagers, and then 2 ultra classes, if you will. So the whole line essentially is only 12 figures, but it's a really good line. And the only thing really to look out for is the Thundercracker of that entire line does suffer from GPS, so that is one of the figures you might want to avoid of it. Or if you do get him, leave him in jet mode. He's one of those flip changers, so it's kind of dubious already what's going to happen. He always cracks on both his ball jointed arm and hip articulation, because it uses that brown gold plastic. So many of them have broken in the past, and it's no surprise that it'll continue to do so. Going into another one, Beast Machines. Beast Machines, surprisingly, for a mainline Transformer line, and it's the only mainline Transformer line that's going to be on this list. It's the only mainline Transformer line that is relatively small. I'm actually quite surprised. It didn't really dawn on me how small Beast Machines was until I started, like, when I moved and I started setting up my entire collection all over again and going like, wow, I could fit almost every Beast Machines figure into this little corner. And relatively small line. There's just like how I mentioned with Beast Machines, there's a few GPS problems there. Deluxe Snarl, the Dinobot Striker, not Striker, the Stegosaurus. He suffers from GPS, and Night Scream is just a mess overall. He has like this like clear orange plastic that just shatters when you try to transform him. So 3 figures to kind of keep an eye on. And in terms of value, I think with the exception of Primal Prime, he's pretty pricey. And I'm trying to think of a few others, but I know that Primal Prime definitely is one of them that's really in that top tier expensive. All the others are relatively modest for their value, especially if you could find them loose complete. Maybe 1 or 2 of those Dinobot characters like the Magmatron might run you a little more. But in general, pretty good toys. Obviously, the Maximals are not as good as the Viacons. The Viacons are way better. But a lot of interesting designs there, relatively affordable. Again, something that it didn't sell well, so there's just so much of it out there, and it's not as popular as its Beast Wars counterpart. Not a very big line, so you could probably get it all relatively cheap. If you kind of just pick and choose your values, so to speak. But good line overall. Overall, a good line. A lot of weird stuff in there, too, like those deployers and everything, and even the chariot deployers and stuff. Those were all very weird stuff. Let's go into Alternators, specifically the U.S. release. I'm not going into Vinyl Tech and all the spin-off stuff like Kissplay. Just the U.S. release of Alternators. And, again, a line that's not very big. Doesn't have a huge demand anymore because Classics kind of like ruined Alternators, and the people who wanted to collect those, I remember like 2007, 2008, literally after Classics was in like full blown like mode, everyone was just unloading their Alternator collections in like full force. It was nuts. And it still is a pretty low demand kind of line right now. The more expensive stuff in it, obviously being like the San Diego Comic-Con Nemesis Prime, the San Diego Comic-Con Rodimus, not to mention there's a lot of bootlegs of that Rodimus kicking around, so that also makes it very difficult. And there is a GPS problem with the Alternator Swerve, which was the red Corvette. He has a terrible GPS problem in his arms and legs, so you got to be very careful with that. And he's one of the more expensive ones, too. Not only was he difficult to find, but he also has GPS, so if you could get one for $20, $30, take it, transform it carefully once, and then that'll be the end of that. But otherwise, everything's fairly affordable, pretty easy to find. Maybe those later wave ones like the Jaguar Ravage, and when I say Jaguar Ravage, I mean the car Jaguar Ravage, and the Honda Civic Rumble. Those are probably the more difficult ones because they were the late wave stuff, but otherwise I'm a little biased with this line because I'm a car guy, I'm a mechanic, so I really like this line. But it's not a big line, so it's pretty easy to collect. Not a lot of people want it, so if it's something that you personally enjoy, you're in luck because it'll be pretty easy to gather together. Another one here is the Titaniums line, more specifically the 6-inch line, but heck, we could even count the 3-inch one too if you want, but more specifically the transformable 6-inch line. It's a pretty short line to my knowledge. I believe it's 25 figures max, if I remember correctly. I mean, it may be a little more if you count like they did like 3 Titanium releases way after the line was done. They did a Hot Zone, Optimus Prime, and God, what was the last one? I have to turn my head now to look. The last one, I think it was Thrust. Yeah. So, like it's an interesting line, a lot of weird designs in there. There was, G1 mixed with War Within designs, which are like these pre-Cybertron designs from Dreamwave, and then you just have like hey, here's a G.I. Joe, here's a G.I. Joe, a G.I. Joe Mega Man, a GI Joe Megatron, and then you got a car robots in disguise. Like it's a very interesting line. Obviously it's hit or miss with some people because of how it wasn't really developed within Hasbro. It was done with their Micro Machines division, and so it could be a little loose on some of the toys. A lot of those designs ended up getting better toys later, so a lot of those designs kind of don't serve a purpose anymore. And even third party made some better toys of some of those designs too. But it's kind of like the only G1 Fallen design we have right now. So like official G1 Fallen design. So that counts for something, right? Again, it's an okay line. It's an okay line. There's some stuff I really like from it. The Cheetor is really cool. The Rodimus is interesting. It was one of the first self-contained Rodimus with trailer transformation designs. The only one that'll kind of be expensive from that might be, again, the late wave stuff. Maybe Ultra Magnus, but then a lot of that stuff has gone down in value since, because, well, it's gotten to the point that just people don't care about that line anymore. The SDCC Skywarp also might be a little more difficult to get, but just due to numbers rather than demand. So probably an easier line to collect. Here's one that I know nobody cares about. Power Core Combiners. Again, very small line, very limited. And really, the second Combiner Wars became a thing, this whole line just kind of collapsed. And with the exception of like a few rarities, very cheap and easy to collect. Even like mint in box. I know like there was a point where I had Power Core Combiner mint in box. I managed to get a few of them from a fan who just hooked me up with them, and then I just sold them cheap at parts parties. And I think I was selling them at $10 a pop, mint in box at the time. And this was like maybe 3 years ago. The only stuff to look out for that's kind of fragile, the Skyburst box set, which is the aerial bots. Yeah, Skyburst is like one of the rare examples of, I guess it's not blue plastic syndrome. It's just the blue plastic that was used was almost on the same level of like a bootleg. And it just fractures and shatters. It's not good at all. So avoid that Skyburst if you can. Or if you do, again, leave them transformed in one mode and that's it. It also has that infamous overrun / spastic situation where there was a Power Core Combiner team, which was the Stunticons. It had the main character was called Spastic. There was a problem with how the name is depicted in the UK because it means a completely different thing over there than it does here, kind of like how Slag is and a lot of other stuff. So it was called Overrun over here. They slapped a sticker over it. You could easily peel that sticker off and still see the name Spastic under it. It's kind of ironic because I think it was like a month later, then there was the Transformer reveal, the Shield line that had Strafe, and in Strafe's bio it says Spastic, and so it's like, well, that didn't solve anything. But getting back to Power Core Combiner, short line, a lot of really good stuff in there. I like some of those designs, like the Undertow, which was like the boat one. Really like that one. There was a Formula 112, Leadfoot, really dig that one. So a lot of really good designs there. Just kind of an unappreciated line, not very popular because, again, it was a combiner line that didn't have individual combiners, so to speak. And the second Power Core Combiners came out, why would anyone want this? And also, like, I'm counting just the American releases. Obviously, they did a Japanese version of these, which were, some of them were straight up 100% just repacks. It was called Transformers United EX, which was written by my buddy Hydra. He actually wrote all the bios and chapter stories with that. But the American line itself, yeah, pretty cheap, pretty easy to get, and some interesting designs, some little nuggets of interesting stuff mixed in there. And the last one I just want to bring up, well, it's a pair, and it's the ones that, while they're cheap and they're small, I don't really recommend putting your money into those ones. And it's the Star Wars Transformers and the Marvel Transformers, both the crossover lines. Both of them are relatively small, but at the same time, they suffer from a lot of QC issues. The Star Wars Transformer line, a lot of people now are seeing, as time progresses, a lot of those figures are falling apart. Primarily because a lot of the joints of the first two waves were done on very thin plastics, and one or two transformations on thin plastics over a period of time with oxygen exposure and all kinds of degradation they've just been falling apart. Broken X-Wings, broken Grievuses, broken Chewbacca / Han Solo Millennium Falcons. Some of the later wave stuff is better, though, like that Anakin Skywalker quad transformer there that turned into like a Star Destroyer. That one's pretty good. Some of the Legend scale stuff that they did, the smaller stuff, was pretty good too. But overall, the line is pretty bad. And even when you go into the Marvel one is kind of the same thing. They had a lot of paint issues. They would put paint on stuff that's part of transformation, so paint would chip. With the Spider-Man mold, which is the motorcycle, there's transformation parts that lead to stress marks happening all over the toy. Again, it was a different design team for both the Star Wars and the Marvel one. It wasn't the traditional Japanese guys or the traditional Hasbro guys like Eric Siebeneller and Steve Bono and Aaron Archer. It was more, I get a feeling it was the Marvel crew and it was the Star Wars crew that did the designs for these, and they weren't very good. And they break a lot. So to pay, even if you could pay like retail price for these individuals, I feel you're not getting your money's worth, because I paid retail back in the day and I feel I didn't get my money's worth. So if I had to like pick one out of all of them, out of the stuff that I've listed, I definitely probably lean more into the Alternators line or Machine Wars. Those are two really, you'll be satisfied, especially with Alternators. If you're someone that has an enjoyment for complexity and transformation, if you're a gearhead, it's a given. But if you're someone who really likes complexity, transformation, and Autobot cars, a lot of good stuff there. And Machine Wars, just because it's a fun piece of history, and I don't know, I just really like Machine Wars. I don't know why. It's just always been a fun micro continuity that I've always wanted to dive into more. And I mean, between the two of them, each one of them only have one GPS problem between the two of them. So that also makes it easier too to pick. But yeah, thank you, MassiveGains, for the question, and I hope that helps you steer your money in the right direction. If you're looking to buy a small Transformer wave, that's definitely something to look into.